At Lonsdale Street Studio, we believe in the power of storytelling to connect people and create change. That's why we're proud to be the production partner for this Running for Resilience podcast.
Well, good morning or good evening, and welcome to the R4R Podcast. Great to have you here with Running for Resilience. And today we've got a very special podcast. Matt and Ben have let me loose in the studio again, and me doing the intro and saying good morning and good evening. My guest is actually sitting in the UN headquarters in New York. Lieutenant General Cheryl Pearce, welcome to the R4R Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Murray. And yeah, good night it's good evening here in New York. So good morning to you in Australia.
And look, we were talking a few minutes ago, your link with R4R, I've got to provide this linkage through your husband, Paul, who was very dedicated to R4R when you posted in Canberra, and you've done many postings in Canberra, and drag you along on occasions. But it'd be remiss of me not to tilt the R4R cap in Paul's direction.
No, so true. He did. He started it and he was involved well before I was. We had moved back to Canberra from Cyprus, and then actually moved from Griffith down to Kingston. We'd bought down there, and I transitioned out of Army across to Home Affairs at that time, and I was finding my feet and then transitioning back out of that again. So over that period of time, it was really, I got the chance to explore Kingston, be involved in the community there, but equally got to, catch up with you again around the coffee shops. But Paul was certainly the instigator for me in coming along to group runs versus really dragging myself out by myself for the longer runs during the week and on the weekend.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, the reason we've got you on the podcast, and as I've said in prepping for this, an incredible journey in your personal life and what you've achieved personally, and a mother, and grown up kids now, where you sit professionally and the work you've done. We'll touch on that. Early career in the Army and obviously breaking new ground as a female in the Army, time in East Timor, Afghanistan, you mentioned Cyprus, now in the UN headquarters, some incredible experiences there. And as we think about resilience, I'm sure you come at this from many lenses. The resilience of those that you've met, the personal resilience you've needed as an individual, but also how you look at resilience as a leader and the vulnerability of those you're working with, and in those peacekeeping situations you're in, and now heading up the military operations side of peacekeeping globally. I understand around 50,000 peacekeepers deployed globally. That's obviously a key thing in thinking about those vulnerabilities and the resilience of those that you're dealing with in those situations of duress.
Yeah, no, look, thank you. And it has been, a really long journey since I joined as a young 18-year-old in the 80s. And the journey from then in resilience individually, resilience collectively, both for myself and supporting others, has really been a link all the way through. And I did at some point have, Rick Burr, when he was Deputy Chief of Army, telling me, something, it was my strong resilience. And I sort of thought about that, but it doesn't come automatically. And what is it? How do you focus on it? And how do you ensure that you look after yourself? And how do you as a leader look after others from that? And it sort of makes you think about it and, from one person to another, are you the same level of resilience throughout, or, how do you go up and down? So it has been significant, but, really from an R4R, my physical well-being was a demand on me as a young 18-year-old, joining the Army. And, back then it was 5 kilometres we had to run, and I was in the first group of integrated training in 1985, and we're issued stubbies. And and Dunlop volleys, and trying to run 5Ks with a female physique in a pair of bloke stubbies, and Dunlop volleys was really difficult. And really, I had a hate relationship with it up front. I was a team sport person, and it was a necessary means to an end to pass the test, to get through my officer training. And then just over my career, it has turned from needing it for physical, for having to pass, through to being really key through to my mental resilience and being part of my key part of who I am, and about how do I look after myself in mental and physical well-being.
And obviously in that journey, there's vulnerabilities that you have personally, that sense of not always being welcomed at the table, or in the environment you're in. Can you talk through that and the way that you've experienced that, but also the way that you've had to display a dignity and a grace in progressing with that backdrop?
Yeah, look, when you join and it's you're not in a sweet spot of many women, and you are trying to fit in, you really can't find your authentic self right up front. You're trying to be part of a team, and in that part of a team is a vulnerability, because you can't be who you are naturally, and so you're trying to fit in. And so that you think slightly different, that you have a learned response to most, because we were all educated and trained in in the military organization. But as a female, I think differently, and what I bring in that value add is how do I have my voice? And it was really, how do I be at the table and not question myself, that the way I think is equally as good, that I have something to offer when, whether it be some of the bullying and the body shaming, the value, the perception that you're not as good. How do you dig deep and be gracious, as you said, is finding a path that you can maneuver through, you can influence, you can shape, and you can value add at every point. And it's not generally the way that most will think about it. Is how do you have the emotional intelligence skills to to influence, and that vulnerability is there all the time. You don't have a lot of people who've got your back. It's a very competitive and judgmental environment. And so for me, it was really just a couple of girlfriends, just a go-to person, somebody who, you could talk to, as I call it, with a shitty first draft. How do you approach different situations? But that vulnerability is there all the time. It's about how you manage that vulnerability and owning it, and actually just accepting it. In the beginning, you were trying, I think for me, probably about the first 15 years I spent through more of a fear of failure. Was my determination and drive to succeed was off the back of a negative, but it took a switch to really own the vulnerability. It's okay. It's okay if I don't land it, or if I stumble, or if I haven't quite got it right, and get away from that sense of perfectionism and just look at it as I am who I am. But it doesn't happen, when you're in your junior years. It's really hard to have that level of vulnerability exposed, and you build up your armor, and you have your armor on front, and so you can be gracious, and then you take that back in. But how much can you absorb? And that's a big one for me on the vulnerability, is how much can you absorb before it really affects, and you need to look after yourself. And it's knowing your test in that vulnerability, and really that health that's linked to that.
There's a number of threads that sort of come through in what you're indicating there. In January this year, we caught up and went for a chilly run around Central Park, and you were reflecting that even, at senior levels of your career, that vulnerability still exists. You're in a multinational construct. There's different cultural context being brought from others. You'd hope the game of paper, scissors, rank, you'd get on top of things and people would recognise your experience, but that's not always the case. So some of that, never goes away, even at senior levels.
No, true. It's when you go into a new environment, and what I say is, if I go in authentically, I recognise, I'm a white Australian female, and in a lot of environments, it's you stand out because you're different, but equally it's the same in Australia. If someone from other cultures, countries comes into Australia, you do the standout. So it is being humble and vulnerable to just step in and listen, but to really hold your position and engage in what you're there to do. But also recognizing, I learned that from Afghanistan, you won't always be considered equal. You won't always be heard. And it is to then go back to have the dignity and the respect to treat everybody as you would want to be treated, and acknowledge that their beliefs and their culture may challenge your own thinking, but it's actually a little bit more about still holding true to values, what the purpose of the why I'm there and what we're trying to achieve. And sometimes it is just the humility and learning and listening, and really listening is often the case. But sometimes it's also holding your ground, and, you'll have those anxious, the feeling in the moments, but, it's, I know, and it sounds odd sometimes, but the impartiality of the blue beret and the blue helmet is sometimes quite key. And when I'm speaking my voice, I'm speaking for all, and not purely as what you see on the outside when you look at me.
And there's obviously a courage around that of taking that attitude.
Yeah, look, it is. It's a courage linked to probably the vulnerability of the situations you go into, what you're doing, how you're communicating. And I probably found it more in, I first came against it in Cyprus. When you're deploying within Australian forces, you have all the force protection, you have PPE, you have the training, you have everything there. And everything in my education and training had prepared me as the commander of the Australian Task Force for Afghanistan. I felt comfortable in what we're doing. I knew it was mission focused, and it wasn't too far out of my comfort zone. Force commander now here is you're leading a multinational force. In Cyprus, I was working and engaging between two opposing forces, the Turkish forces and the Cypriot National Guard, and they're both conscripts, and it was a buffer zone, and you're working and you're unarmed and you've only got communication, and I'm working with three different generals from opposing forces, and the mandate was to stop a reoccurrence of fighting, and you're trying to de-escalate the situation, and you can only do that through communication. And you're in a situation where you can hear you're out in the buffer zone, someone's cocked a weapon, you're unarmed, and you're trying to just work through that and then continue the conversation, continue engaging, and your communication is your power, and that engagement is your power.
And in a multilingual sense, no doubt. So there's
Yes.
nuances that get lost in translation there as well, I'm sure.
Well, if you ever see photos of me having conversations, I don't know that I could talk without my hands, Murray. So
Yeah.
it's sort of like there's no Italian in me, but it comes with my communication. And I would say equally, non-verbal communication is equally as important, because language is always difficult, but it's also sometimes often an icebreaker. So when you're trying to communicate and you're trying to find commonality, it really is you're joining. And like with our Turkish forces is our history in Gallipoli and our shared experiences there. And same with our history with the Cypriots, and we've got a huge diaspora both within Australia. So drawing on the connections that you have is really key when you're trying to reduce the tensions and stop the fighting. So it's interesting on how you draw on history, shared experiences, because within the military, especially in a multinational environment, different time in history or different points now, you may be on opposing sides, but in another time you'll be on the same side. So it's often that mutual respect that you have, which you hold dear to the profession of arms of who we are as military, in communicating, engaging. And it's the same whether it be in the Democratic Republic of Congo, working with the FARDC, working with the forces there, as in, in Lebanon with UNIFIL, the Lebanese armed forces. It's that mutual respect, but it still has the vulnerability and sort of that courage to be there and to lean in.
And I think if we go to a sort of personal level, someone running around the lake, looking for those points of commonality with that person they're running alongside, looking for those shared bonds that creates that empathy and those points of connection there. So it's interesting. We've touched on sort of the personal side, resilience, vulnerability, courage, those shared bonds that join us, all in the context of a very diverse people. And you were talking about the army and that sort of assimilation approach to the army, putting everyone in stubbies and volleys and trying to make everyone the same. We might touch a bit more on where the army's evolved since. There's also in resilience, you spoke about your girlfriends and the shitty first draft and going to those people who are your brain's trust, your support network. But sometimes we get support from unlikely quarters. I picked up a thread, a regimental sergeant major or an officer Lofty went.
Yeah.
Can you tell us the story of Lofty and that unlikely quarter for you and the influence that had on you?
It's look, thanks, Murray, and I can feel it now. When I was a young cadet and the staff, it was that first integrated training. I don't think that there was anybody outside the RSM and the commandant who wanted us to succeed. And it was a really difficult period. And it was, and I don't think we're any different to any, it is for me, it's a difficult period for most of us as young adults taking on joining the services. It doesn't matter which one. But in this training, everything has to be the same. It was really trying to get us to be the same as the men. We were different, trying to accept that we're different, and it was really trying to assimilate how we could fit in, and it was really hard to believe in yourself at that time, and really it was just a huge vulnerability and just going day by day. And I didn't think that, never felt like I was good enough or that I was going to make it. And from the parade ground at Portsea, and there's not many around that have sort of the Portsea track back up to the accommodation, and it was the RSM's hut. It was all the rules about what you had to do as you're passing the RSM's hut. But he stopped me and he goes, Miss McDonald, come here. And I went over and he, we had the peak caps back then. He lifted my hat and he was like 6'6", and he just was, Miss McDonald, I believe in you. And nothing more needed to be said. That was all that I needed to get me through the whole year. It was like just that one person who believed in me was sufficient. And because I was really struggling to, believe in myself at that time, because all you get is the negative. There was never any positive praise or feedback, and, everything from, peers to the staff to everybody. And so, yeah, it was that moment in time. And, it was, he was pivotal throughout, and I always knew he was there. And now up in heaven, he looks down because his daughter, and she would be, I think, she's just joined Kapuka, and she would have to be close to just below my age. And we reached out when Lofty passed. We connected in. I was in Cyprus, and connected in, and we've been in connection since. And so she's following in her father's footsteps, with children and starting through Kapuka. So, but it is those points in time. It's just the humans that you come across, and it's they really are, what makes your journey. And I'll just say one, a dear friend of mine, when I transitioned out of the army, and yes, I've transitioned back in, but when I transitioned out, I was in the middle of COVID. I was locked down. My last day, Canberra went into lockdown, so I was at home. So, my family was all going to come, and they couldn't. And so I was in my apartment, and a dear friend of mine, Alison, had said to me, she said, write down just a sentence or a paragraph about each of your postings over your career. And, so that was a lot. But I did spend the day writing, but it wasn't, my memories weren't about what I did or what I achieved or where we went. It was about the humans, the people at each point in my career who touched me in different ways. And and I really had a really reflective and a wonderful day, a really personal day, just taking me back through my career to all the people that impacted on me in different ways, and what I took from that. And that's been really key now for me in how I think about things and what's important.
Mm. And it's an interesting thing if you went to each of those individuals that you reflected on there and you asked them what influence do they, on the day when you retire from the army, would you be writing their name down? And a number of them would probably reflect, oh, no, I was just in the noise. We were there,
Yeah.
yes, we were acquainted and that sort of thing. I'm a story going back a few years, and this is a bit of a pivot. One of Paul's best mates, who was a work colleague of mine at IBM, sadly took his own life. And at the funeral, you just sense all of this love for Keechi and from so many different quarters, from his footy, from his professional existence. But he didn't, you sense he didn't get that feeling of all of that love for him that would be greater than what he felt to take his own life. But one of the things chatting to Paul afterwards was how he didn't, as a very close mate, see those signs. And we think the influence that those people had throughout your career and Lofty and others leaning in and just providing those little points of encouragement. We can't wait for the warning signs with mental health. And as we head out with someone for a run around the lake or, a lap around Central Park in New York or whatever, we don't know the noise that's in their life, and that sort of space. Where's your take in terms of mental health and how that need to reach out rather than waiting for the warning?
Yeah, look, thanks, Murray. It was really a moment, and watching Paul and his mates, Sharpie was another, who they were all there for each other and they all talked, but they didn't talk. It was what was not said, and they have sworn to really now check in with each other, and it it's one that is a loss that's felt deeply by all of them, and it's how to have the humour and how to also have the sadness and the grief as well in it. But it goes back for me is, right back from Lofty went to me. It only takes a touch point. And I learned that a lot, and I must admit I do it a lot. It's just to stop and how are you? And it can be little, and I'm always just interested, and I try to listen, because it is sometimes people put facades up, and it's actually just reaching in, and running is a great way, because in some ways it's like with children, and it's not a parallel in that way, but you can reach people when it's not eye to eye. You can run, or in a car, you can be next to somebody and nothing has to be said, but then something can pop up, or a conversation can start. And I find when you're running and you're just chatting, you don't have to say something, or you could say something and it just triggers, or you say something, they don't say it back, but further down the path, they'll say something. So it's actually not any deliberate, it's just a really natural, like you do, is just communicate and have a conversation. But when you got your senses on and you know what you're looking for, sometimes I find that you can hear what's not said, and you're more attuned to it, because everybody's got vulnerabilities, everybody's got some form of anxiousness of issues that are happening with them now or in the past, and it is just about connecting on many different levels. And even if not that first time you've gone for a run, but as you catch up with them a second, third, fourth times, sometimes they'll be opening up, and it's actually just creating that pathway to open that conversation. But it's actually, you got to be really genuine, is my take on that one, Murray. People will say, how are you? But they're not really interested, and you can pick that up, and you just, you just shut down and you don't really engage. It's actually the genuineness. And I find in the, from a running community, and especially in the R4R, it's everyone's quite attuned to it. So it really is just a shared community of, joy, happiness, but also recognizing that it's really tough for some at some points in time, and acknowledging that it's not any less, it just is. And how do you be there in their space at that point in time?
And I think there's an ongoing thing for R4R, and as an organisation, initially focused on being better, not bigger, but they threw that out the window, because as they became better, they became bigger, and there's that expansion. But you mentioned being genuine, and you can sit there and introducing a run and say, hey, check in on those around you, or we're here to support mental health. But you can largely do that lip service if you're not careful. And so genuinely checking in with someone, and as you say, it may not be on one run, it may be over a number of touch points. It may be a run one week, it may be having coffee the next, or a beer after a Wednesday night run the next. That genuine connection is very important. Can I pivot into a different role you played? You talked about the Stubbies and Dunlops at Portsea back in the day, just a few years ago. You then ended up back in Canberra with the Defence Academy. What was your role at the Defence Academy?
Yeah, look, it was as commandant, and it's probably 2016, 2017? No, 2017, 2018. Yeah, look, it was probably, for me, Murray, one of the most, it was probably nearly one of the best jobs or best opportunities that, I wouldn't call it a job, best experiences, and a real privilege to have, and really to have 1,500 18 to 22-year-olds, and to really they develop their character, their military, you're delivering their military and training, as well as the intellectual curiosity in developing that as they do their academic. but it's providing an environment where they're safe, they can fail safely, but they also can learn, thrive, and develop themselves as individuals, but also the character that they'll need to be a senior leader, not just in defence, but many of ours, step out at different points along the way and be great leaders in the community. And young Tiff, I did see, was a student of mine, and just can be so proud of what she's doing now. And I really do feel like it's a handing of the baton from one generation to another as I watch our young officers now thrive in the community, whether it be defence or broader, and in fulfilling their dreams and goals and what they want to do. So, but yeah, it was a real privilege to have the opportunity to be commandant during that period, Murray.
And yeah, I had the privilege of sitting in this room interviewing Tiff on an earlier R4R podcast. Recommend you have a look at that. Quite an amazing woman and incredible thing she's doing. If we think of, there's an evolution in thinking. I'm sure from Portsea to ADFA in that intervening period. I personally joined ADFA a year after you joined Portsea. There was it's almost criminal the treatment of women in my year. The year behind me, they had a view of getting all the women in their class by the time they graduated. That was a stated sort of tagline at the time, which is just horrific. There is this evolution. What do you think, from a values perspective or philosophy, about the way, if it's not assimilation anymore, what's the philosophy you take in taking those young lives, that energy and enthusiasm and that sort of thing, and adding value to doing no harm and adding value to it in an environment like that?
Yeah, look, it's allowing. If I think about, and you're right, I don't ever want to think that our next generation had the experiences that we had. So you try and create the environment that is safe and that they are not exposed. Now, I'd be naive to say that. If I take, I worked with Kate Jenkins when she did the census on all universities in their, the colleges within universities. And that age bracket is about how do you develop their values and their character, respect for others, bystander rules. How do you develop and make them accountable and responsible for that? But knowing, especially in young males, that peer acceptance and overrides their own judgment and decision making at times, and how do you hold what is for theirs the right to do? So how do you set the boundaries? How do you hold them accountable? And how do you develop them to be the best version of themselves they can be in an environment that's safe? How do you build still the buddy system? How do you look after each other? How do you develop that sense of doing the right thing? All the skills, and the diversity of backgrounds that come, and you think about, if you go back to yourself, Murray, and you and I say about even my early years, you try and fit in, and so you check yourself now and go, no, I'm holding true to who I am and what I believe in. But I know when you're a lot younger, that peer acceptance and that noise of trying to be who you are and what you need to be. But I want to be one of the group. I don't want to be ostracized out as a young adult in that scene. So it's a really it's a hard journey for them. It's a really, and you're in a fishbowl at ADFA in regards to there is no private world. Nothing you do is not known by a group. You're assessed for most things you do, and it is really difficult. So it's actually being everything for them, being a listening ear, being a mentor, being a leader, being the accountable, holding them accountable, but actually help them develop and giving them the confidence to be that best version of themselves they can be and to grow into being great young adults. And so for me, that responsibility is key. And but for me is what's not acceptable. And look, I was quite hard on that, maybe based on my own experiences. And what I saw is, behaviors for me that didn't align, and it wasn't actually a single incident, but a pattern of behavior over time that didn't improve, and are really a belief of there was an equality, a belief that they were better than, and anything that has a power over or better than, I've got no time for. And so really listening and watching group dynamics, but individuals who didn't matter how much that they towed the line and each incident wasn't sufficient, just watching patterns of behavior over time, because if they can't do that with their peers, how are they going to do that as a leader and lead teams? And so it was actually really, for me, it was important about the character of an individual and letting them develop that character and knowing that they're not going to get it right all the time. I didn't. I can imagine you didn't. And they just don't get to live with any privacy. Their world is captured on social media. So it's how do you give them the skills as well to navigate that space?
Yeah, and so many challenges, even just moving away from home and your social network and the support of those friends close to you. We've got a great run out at UC, a couple of runs a week out at UC now, and providing that support with Running for Resilience. That's a great thing into that community. There's challenges there. And as you said, Kate Jenkins' work across the universities, ADFA's is a completely different fishbowl, which has those challenges and some that lack of being able to hide, cuts in. But it's an interesting thing. There's the negative side of that pattern of behaviour that you speak to, but there's also that learning the right behaviours and the way that you can your own personal approaches that are going to work and that are going to sit comfortable with you. As you said early on in the call, it's hard to be true to yourself when you're trying to be part of the crowd. But there is a true north in that's important to maintain and not lose that alignment of your values.
Yeah. No, it is really true, and it's about developing, each individual to be authentic to who they are, and that is again hard when you're 18 to that age group, that age bracket is really hard. And so how do you give them the skills and the toolkit? And a lot of the time it's just giving them the toolkit. And if they got the right character though, Murray, for me, if they got the potential and I would call it and are good humans, they will get there. I have a real belief, and some do it later than others. We talked about when we were younger, you're either a golden child or you weren't, and the doors were opened or they weren't. And but now it's not about that. You see some really great individuals who really thrive at different points in life and career, and but equally others will stumble. But it's not about and we are big, and I find a lot in the military we're very judgmental. It's competitive in a judgmental world, and it's a tough gig, and it's that resilience is hard to, sometimes it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it's a great community, but in other times it's also it can be really difficult because you know that there's not that anonymity in a way that you're always on, you're always judged. It's quite a competitive environment, and so it's hard to find your way in it in the journey sometimes. And it's how do you have the go-to person or somebody that's just an ear, and it's a random ear, like you say in R4R, that is just sometimes at a point in time and that just listens and cares. And when you're doing it tough, you'd be surprised that, for myself is I burst into tears to random people who just do the, "Are you okay?" and you go, "No, I'm not." But, like you don't expect that to come out. You think you've got it all together and someone just gives you those couple of nice words and you actually go, you don't realize you built up such a holding on to so much, and then all of a sudden someone does that. So whether it's actually in your initial training or anywhere through through your journey, it's to do that, and the ability. And I think running's a great space for that, because it's not competitive. That's the thing. You're not, there's no win lose. And so you take off, you can play the team sports, and you're in the moment, you're on target all the time. Running is different. Yeah, I can say if you're doing a 100-meter sprint, but that's not my forte, Murray. I am the back of the pack, and I might always be quite competitive, but I don't have the skills to go with competitiveness. But for me, running is a non-competitive environment, which is just a safe environment. And you can walk, you can run, you can walk, run. Everyone has injuries at different points in time, and nobody's judging. Nobody cares. It's actually we're all just getting out and enjoying it.
Yeah, and you were talking next month you're doing Chicago, the 5th of your Abbott's runs.
Yes, 5th of the 6th and
5th of the 7th. We were having a discussion before the call, and I'm starting an advocacy campaign to get Cheryl to do Sydney with me sometime down track. So Chicago next month. You've been travelling a lot, probably more travel between here and then. A training regime that is highly compromised. A work regime which has you non-stop. So how do you approach Chicago with that in mind?
Look, I find running is my mental health piece, to try and keep my own balance. Like when I was younger, I joined the military. I'd been a sporty kid. I put on a lot of weight. We're on double rations, a lot of endurance and a lot of body shaming. And I really struggled with how I saw myself, how people saw me. And running was a requirement for tests, for our physical training tests. We, for a long time, I can't recall when it changed. We always had the 5K test, and so it was a purpose in to be weight management and physical training tests. And then it changed when I had my children. I've got 2 beautiful daughters but when I had them, I couldn't commit to team sport. And I was then trying to juggle parenthood, and running became not only just a physical activity for me because I couldn't do team sport anymore. I couldn't commit to team sport, but equally just a chance for me. And it was my space, my time, nobody. And I did the adage, Murray, you can't cry and run at the same time. It's really difficult. You've got to be able to breathe.
Yeah.
So, but it was my way to just get my release. It was my mental health, and running for me has always been a mental health piece. The natural competitor in me sees something that I want to achieve. And Paul and I, when I'd done a few marathons. I started in my 30s. But when Paul came down with cancer, and we did a bit of a pack that on his road recovery, it was quite significant, his recovery. And we had New York back in 2018, and then that was a goal. All he wanted to do was finish, or he just wanted to get to the start line. And so that was then the journey to do the 6. But the journey of running was never about the finish. The journey of the running was the training and the destination. And I am probably a bit more of a destination runner for the big ones, to get the holiday. And Boston for me was I did it straight after COVID. I'm not good at being contained within a close confines. I'm a let me out and about, and I struggled with COVID being in lockdown. So that was a goal for that. So here for Chicago, it really is about finding space for me, finding space for just enjoying what's around me. Because I know in my current role how privileged we are to be able to do this. The environments I go to, them, I know where, the humanitarian and peacekeeping is, and it's difficult. And just to reflect how privileged we are to be able to run for pleasure is really key. And also the surroundings in New York, along the Hudson, whether it be Central Park and weaving around streets, is just a joy and a release. But I'll tell you what though, my week in the lead up to long runs, Murray, is full of prehab, rehab, trying to hold the body in one piece to get to the start line. But I do it knowing that it is something that I love, and I don't, no one ever asks you and what time you did in a marathon. They just go, hey, yeah, well done, you did a marathon. It's like triathlon. Unless you're ultra competitive, none of my friends will ask me, what my time was. It was just like, hey, well done, you did it. And so for me, it's a mindset about, very underdone for this Chicago one, but just to get out there and have some fun.
Nice, yeah, and I think it is great to get out there and have some fun. And we had a great crew up at the Sydney Marathon a few weeks back from R4R, getting out there and having fun. Some, trying to do a PB and do a time, but many just getting there and having a bit of fun along the way. I remember bumping into Singy on his way back down Anzac Parade, and we did always look on the bright side of life. Very, very good. And that thing of adjusting your sights and your expectations, not to get there and thrash yourself if you haven't had the ideal lead in, and just get out there and how to enjoy it. I'm mindful that you also spent time as the Deputy Chief of Army. So many things you've done, and at a time when the Veterans and Serving People Royal Commission was playing, and we talk at R4R around mental health. We have a lot of serving people and veterans in the R4R community, and I know you've supported Bravery Trek, and we've got or Bravery Trust. Bravery Trek is coming up next month. If you move your head a bit, we'll see your Bravery Trek shirt in the background there. We talk about the community in R4R, and defence personnel leave that community, or at times we talked about the autoimmune thing in the defence community, which can spit people out and be quite judgmental, and people end up in a lonely place. They also end up in a place where that financial security can be ripped from under them, hard to find employment outside. We have spouses moving all the time in the military, which makes it hard for them to build that financial foundation and continuity in their careers and what have you. Veterans and their mental health and that transition out of the military, you've done it once already, is a place where we need increased focus as a community. You've obviously been at the coalface of that in Army, and seen it with those around you and those that have served with you and for you. What's your take on how we need to focus in that space?
Yeah, look, thanks, Murray. It affects everyone differently, and I do think that, you don't collectively put all the veterans in the same, this is what they will go through, this is what how they will experience and make expectations. Everyone's journey will be different. The loss of sense of community, and for many, the financial. I know we've spoken about, when we were running here in January, but also with, Bravery Trek, is really is the absolute, everything is gone. Your perception, your friends are gone, your financial stability is gone, your community is gone. you talk about, and it's something I feel a lot, not as one as a veteran, but equally one as being in the military. And I still have a sadness. I talk to my one of my girlfriends. We talk about who is our community, what is our community, and you don't build up unless you stay in the same location. A community over years. Your community is your military community. So as soon as you leave it, it's and it goes on. You're just a drop in the bucket of a huge organization that goes on. And so how do we then support those individuals, and collectively, how do we find a way and listen and find a path to help support them? And look, there is much being done, and but I do really commend all. And what I do like about what you're doing, Murray, is you're tapped into what I think is really important on the financial side, because the stresses of the financial, not just when you're in, but as you said, your partner doesn't have, your wife, husband doesn't have super if they've been traveling around with you. They don't have that certainty over time. And not everybody leaves when the kids are older and are independent. You've got schooling, education. There are so many, that pressure on. And then without the community and the base by which to work, it's really important that we collectively, who are still in the veteran community, who can, and the community more broadly, to be able to lean in and support and acknowledge. And I think we've come a long way. I do think we've still got a long way to go, but I do think that we recognise our veterans in a way we haven't a lot in the past, and we have a real sense of purpose of what we want to try and do and support. I think very much we just need to make, to continue to listen. And I do see that a lot with you, Murray, through whether it's your running, whether it's your, with Bravery Trek, what you're doing there, and you listen hard, and you're able to actually make a difference. And it's all of those, what I call really that empathetic approach, and really the giving of it is, it's not in it for anyone other than the veteran, I think is really important. And how do we come together? But equally, there's a lot of noise out there. And so how do we capture the messaging, not being pithy, not being shallow, but how do we keep the messaging to build the base of support that we need? How do we resonate? How do we connect with the community of the why of what we need to do? And so that's what I think is some really, we got to keep doing it. And it's got to be something that resonates with them, in a really hyper social media world, and a lot of inputs coming from different, what makes us and our veterans different, and something that should take their focus within the community. And it's about how do we communicate that? How do we share the journey and get the buy-in and the support from our communities for which we serve in? And I do think that Bravery Trek is doing a huge amount of work in that, but I do think it's about doing it through a way that people can resonate with.
I think that's very true. And look, R4R is doing a great job. We see a lot of serving people and veterans there, and you probably won't know that you're running alongside a veteran unless you crack into that discussion with them and sort of discover that. And what we were saying before about those random, the empathy, the check-ins with people, supporting them, it may be that little thing that you're listening that makes a big difference, or something you're saying supporting someone that makes a big difference. Obviously, in Bravery Trust case, providing emergency financial support, counselling and education is important. Next month, we've got Bravery Trek starting on the 1st of October. And if you can sign up for that, braverytrek.com.au. And also on the 17th and 18th of October here in Canberra, they've got the Dust to Dawn run starting at 7 p.m. at the War Memorial on the 17th of October, running through the night till 7 a.m. the next morning. So those that are in Canberra, Cheryl, I know you'll probably be in Taper for Chicago at that time. But those here in Canberra, if you can come along and join, please do. Cheryl, it's been fantastic having you on the podcast. What an incredible career. And I think many of the things you've touched on, that empathy, that the leaning in to support people, having your own true north, but appreciating the challenges you face in having to try and fit in. The one that really sticks with me, you can't cry while you're running. And I think that's gold. And that idea that we lean in to support others, we don't wait for the warning signs, be that veterans, be that someone on a run, be that a family member, a work colleague, is very important. So any closing comments from you, Cheryl, before we wrap up the call?
No, look, Murray, look, thank you. For me, I feel very blessed. I love what I do and I do what I love. And, but I recognize that's not, that's not there for all, and is just to reach out and check in and, align everything you said and just really have that, I call it nearly the humility to just understand the privilege that we're in and just to reach out left and right and check in. And it's really important, and it's who we are, and it's, what we do. Thank you.
Awesome. All the best to you and Paul, and all the best in Chicago in a few weeks' time. We look forward to hearing the fun that you've had during the run.
I'll send a photo through, Murray, and we'll see what it's like at the finish line. But hey, all the best for the dusk to dawn. And you said before we started your double marathon, so I'll put it out there. You've got what you're hoping to achieve, and but enjoy as you always do. And I see there's a great amount of build up and a great amount of support. So I hope it all goes well, and I look forward to doing a slow run here in Central Park through October to build up the kilometres as well. So be good.
Thanks very much, Cheryl, and thanks for joining us on the R4R podcast. Great to have you join us today. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you. Cheers.